Alright, in this video I'm going to talk about the foliage brush and how to use that in your scene. So at this point you should have been painting your landscape. So I have my landscape here, and this allows me to have basically the area that I'm planning on working on, which is going to be in this area around this little cemetery ornament here. And what I want to do is I have basically the ground, and I've gone into some of the props and some of the content with some of my some of the materials and the content that I'd be using, the models, the props, and I've gone in and I've grabbed a log or two, and I also have a couple items, you know, a stump, and I've kind of just I'm placing them in my scene. So if I wanted a pile of wood, I will place that, dragging it into my scene, and place it somewhere in the vicinity to start to build and create. I'm using the R tools and all that. So these are going to be things in the background that I might want to be using back there. And so I might continue to build that background environment up, knowing that I may or may not use, or it may not be seen necessarily in my overall scene, but I may just be adding it just to have it back there. But one of the things that I might want to do is I want to add some basic props like foliage and trees that I want to use. Now what I want to do is I'm going to add some of my main trees, the trees that I want to basically modify and manipulate by hand, if you will, or add them one at a time. So like a tree like this, if I was to drag this tree in here, let's say I can drag it, I'm going to change my I can move this around in space, but what I can do is I can scale this up a little bit. So if I want to adjust the scale, I can. So maybe I want it to be that big, or maybe bigger. So as I do that, I want to just kind of use it as a reference for within my scene. So the different trees that I add, I can add them, modify them, whichever way that I want, and add them one at a time within my scene to kind of start to add what I would call kind of the core trees that I want for my shot. So remember, I'm going to be kind of working down in this area, building, working off of this stump and then some other rocks. So I want some basic items in the background. Now, some other items that I might want to be adding into my scene may be things that I want to add. I might want to add them more quickly than just one at a time like this. So some of these things I can add one at a time, and I'll probably be very specific where I place some of these things for my shot. So I may be very detailed, making sure it doesn't touch, or it does touch, or it gets close enough in my scene. But sometimes I want to add things like grass or flowers or something where I just want to paint them. So when I want to just paint something in my scene, I want to use what's called the foliage brush. And the foliage brush is going to allow me to paint objects that I drag in here. Now you don't actually have to use it for just foliage, but for this particular case I'm going to use it for some grasses, because I want to paint some grasses around this area, and I'm going to show you how you can do that. So I'm in my foliage folder under models and then foliage, and I'm going to drag it up here and add it into my little palette here. I'm going to try to pull this down. So I have this grass fluff. So if I select grass fluff and I go back into my scene like this, you'll notice that I have a dome. And this dome allows me to paint instances of that grass fluff within that dome. Now I can adjust the density of the grass. So notice that I will add some more grasses here. And as I paint, I can then fill this space with, it's going to add grasses within that scene. And you got to be careful. I can adjust the size of my brush here. So if I just want to add them around. One thing that I can do is I can go up here and I can actually say single instance mode. So if I say I want to put some specifically around here, I can click on this and then I can go in and I can click individually around the base of my, in this particular case, the base of my model, and I can build up kind of like the grass in a little bit more of a controlled manner. I can create little patterns if I want. Maybe I'm going to make a little pathway by just clicking around. Now if I click on this, it can actually paint on certain surfaces or in areas. So what I want to do is I'm just going to add this. Now I don't have really much control over this right now. It's the size. Now what I'm going to do, I want to show you something else. So let me show you. Each one of these has, if I right click on it, I can say deactivate. And if I deactivate, I go back over here, notice that I cannot actually paint anymore. But if I right click and say activate, I can actually bring something else in. So let's say if I want to put some flowers in here. I'm going to drag the flowers in. Now if I have both of them in, notice that when I click, let me go into here, if I say activate and remove, if I make my brush bigger, I can start putting in these objects in my scene. Notice that they're a little bit larger, and as I paint, it adds these objects in my scene together. So I'm now painting both flowers and grass, and if I go in here and I increase the density, I can increase more as I go around. Okay. Now if I don't want to paint these flowers, I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to kind of go back. But maybe all I want to do is paint some flowers individually. I'm going to say deactivate on this one. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go into my single instance mode. Make sure this is active, and then I'm going to put in some flowers. Oh, I guess it's the wrong one. I'm going to activate this one and deactivate that one. And I can put in some flowers around the edge of this. I might put some over here, around here. And around here. So they got these flowers in that area. Now I can, again, I can add that. I can increase my brush size. If I want to increase my brush size, I'm going to hold down my right bracket. And oh, I'm in my single instance, so I'm going to increase my brush size, and then I can paint more flowers if I want and adjust the density. It only goes up to 0 and 1. Now if for some reason I didn't like what I painted, I can go back and I can use what's called this lasso, and whatever's activated, I can go back and select those. So I'm going to make those active. Let's say I didn't like that. I can go back and paint that and then delete it. So I could say delete. If I didn't like that, I can clear that out. Another thing I can do, one of the areas that I might want to be working with, is I might want to add some rocks. So I might go to my models. So I could add trees here if I wanted to, and then I could activate or deactivate these, and then I could paint trees in my scene if I wanted to. Oh, I've got that selected. I'm going to deselect that. We go back to my brush, And I could paint some trees here. Now I don't want that to be so dense, so my paint density needs to go way down. And then if I say I had some trees in the background that I want to have in the distance, say over here, I could add some. But here's one thing that happens is that if I paint on the sides, they tend to grow out based on the face of that object. So I'm going to hit undo there. And I'm going to bring that back. So if I have a lot of trees like in the distance, if I want to have some trees maybe up on the hills, I might consider putting them up there. But then they might grow at a slant. So maybe if I'm not going to be up there, I can see them up on the hillside. Another thing that I can do is I'm going to go, instead of using these, I'm going to deactivate this. I'm going to go down to my models and I'm going to go into my rocks, and then I can bring in rocks into my area, and I can actually paint some rocks, maybe some different size rocks. And from there, what I might try to do is I'm going to make sure these are all off, that I have these all active, and then I could paint some rocks. Notice I'm adding rocks to my scene, and I can add them. I'm going to go ahead and go to my models, and I can select that. Oops, I don't want to do that. I can select my model and say I want to add some rocks around this area. Now these rocks are being put in pretty heavily, so if I go back here and I do my lasso, and I can pick up these rocks, I can get rid of them, delete them. I'm just showing you could grab them. So if I go back to my painting tool and I have my rocks, I adjust my density down. I might want to paint some rocks in this area. And this is only if I want to just add some rocks just quickly around this model. Now notice that threw that up there, so I wouldn't want that there. And it's going to generate these kind of randomly, so it doesn't always work for a natural look. So that doesn't always look, but if you wanted to put some rocks in there quickly, you certainly could. So what I would probably do, you could consider saying instance mode, and I might use, I'm going to deactivate a couple of these. I'll use this one, and I might want to place some rocks in this scene, and I'll turn my density up. Make sure I have that active, make sure I'm on my paint brush, and make sure I go back down here. This is a fairly small rock, so I want to look for something a little bit bigger, and in this particular case this is a pebble, so I don't want pebbles, I want to bring in a rock. So let me get rid of that. And I want to bring in some pretty good rocks. So rock number 3 looks like this one, so I'm going to make that active. I'm going to try adding that. There we go. So now I have a little bit bigger rock in my scene. I don't particularly want it right there, but I might want to add a rock maybe around in this area. And I might start building up some rocks in my scene. If I make my brush size bigger, I might be able to start building it up here. Now I may add some more rocks to that. If I increase my size, I won't be able to necessarily paint more rocks on top of it, but I may be able to put some rocks down a little bit, which doesn't necessarily work in this particular case. So I might, and since I'm working in such a localized area, I probably will put rocks in by hand here. I could maybe in the background add some rocks, or a variety of rocks that might, I just might not have to worry so much about where they are. And then I will add some different sized rocks in there later on. So I could quickly put those in the background, add some where it's not so bad. And so what I would do is I could find some things in this particular case where I have little grasses and maybe some rocks in this scene. that I can be working with and adding little bits. So as I'm